RevOpsAF, the only podcast for people who are RevOpsAF and want to learn all about things that are RevOpsAF.
Our goal is to give the revenue operations community, that includes marketing, sales, and CS, for any of you not paying attention, the skills needed to accelerate their careers.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of RevOpsAF, the podcast where we talk to people who are RevOpsAF about things that are RevOpsAF. I am your co-host, Matthew Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a global community of 16,000 plus revenue operators from all over the globe. And today we are sitting down with Garrett Stanton, who is an independent advisor now to a variety of different early stage and growth stage technology companies, but he has also been the VP of sales at companies like Okta and has previously been an account executive over at Salesforce as well, along with a bunch of other pretty incredible experiences. And we are going to be sitting down with Garrett and talking specifically about the Valley of Death. And I know it sounds, maybe morbid a little bit, but it is possible to get through this. And specifically, we're going to be talking about what it's like to go on this revenue/sales startup journey as you go from $1 million up to $10 million of ARR. Garrett, welcome, my friend. To get started, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, both personal and professional career?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. About myself, let's see, where to begin? I'm 42 years old, father to two young children, Madeline and Declan, husband to Rachel. Live here in beautiful, sunny Santa Barbara. I've spent the last 20 years of my professional life, as you already touched on it, some well-known companies in kind of unsexy categories, customer relationship management, identity management, but I've been part of some great chapters in entrepreneurship and helping build go-to-market organizations. So as I reflect on those last 20 years, those are kind of the core lessons that I draw from it is culture, operational rigor and excellence, and ultimately knowledge. And so I'm happy to share some of my perspectives. By no means is it meant to be instructions. It's just a reflection of sorts, and we can get into the core themes around this 1 to 10 journey that many refer to as Valley of Death.
Yeah, I know I've been a business operations VP at a company kind of in that $1 to $10 million phase as well. And so there's a lot of learnings and a lot of things that happen there. So I guess first off, tell us let's start with hey, what is this Valley of Death? What does it mean for startups that are kind of going through that, whether they're at the start, in the middle, or at the end? How do you define it? What does it mean? Let's set the stage there.
Yeah. So you touched on my kind of professional career, starting at Salesforce, and then moved on to a early stage company called Delphix, which was recently acquired last year. And then finally, this company called Okta, which is in the identity space. Those last two companies, I'd say I joined prior to $1 million. And then so watching as a member of the go-to-market team, ultimately a member of the leadership team, and then over the last, you touched on several years, independently advising companies that are in that 1 to 10 space. That seems to be the place, Matt, where companies, I wouldn't say fail, but they don't reach their full potential. And so it suggests a lot of thinking around why is that? I think the stats I saw was something like 4% of companies make it to $1 million in annual recurring revenue, regardless of how much they've raised, right? They make $1 million in revenue. Some might call that product market fit. And then it's the what's next. It's, well, it must be 10 million, and then 100 million, then a billion. But that 1 to 10, I was shocked to see that it's like less than 4% or approximately 4%. You can do the math or check these facts, but quick search on Google might suggest that it's a fraction of a percentage point. And so why is that when there's literally thousands upon thousands of companies that we read about that don't ever make it out of that 1 to 10? And so I think it's a biblical or maybe even a literary reference, a historical reference to this Valley of Death. Yeah, I participated in that phase. Like I said, 2 companies that had successful exits and many more companies that are on their way to seeking a high degree of success from breaking that $10 million kind of barrier.
Yeah, I mean, startups are hard just to get started before you even get any customers or revenue, right? And then you got to go from, before you go to, again, this will sound obvious, before you go from 1 to 10, you got to get 0 to 1, right? And so now you do that. And then, like you said, you add on the incredibly high failure rate that comes in And it proves just how hard that actually is. But the flip side is you've now kind of witnessed this and experienced this a handful of times over. And I'm sure I've seen some patterns that have emerged that can indicate things that work, not work. So I guess let's talk a little bit about maybe some of those tactics or those things that you've seen kind of work well and maybe not work well. What's a good way for people to kind of think about solving for some of these unique challenges that present themselves on this $1 to $10 million journey?
Yeah, so I think the model or mental model, it's not my own, but one that I follow along is first, I think you're touching on this, is the problem. Is the problem resonant with an audience? Is there a market, right? Kind of one begets the next. Problem informing which product or set of products to build to tackle that problem. The next would be, I mentioned market. Is this something affecting a certain population in the minority, or is this a broadly understood and quantifiable problem in the market today? And then the last element would be the team. It's the team of people that are going to take that observation or that core thesis of, hey, there's a problem, and with a problem there can be not just one, but several solutions to it. A market that is receptive, or in some cases might be begrudgingly receptive to the message, and ultimately the team that has the desire, will, and skill to go and serve that market and reap the benefits.
Yep. So can you give us an example on how that framework of problem, market, team kind of applies to, again, one of the experiences that you've had, whether it was with companies you've been at or that you've advised?
Yeah, so there's 5 areas, but I think for sake of the audience's time and everyone's attention, there's really 5 things. So starting first with having a plan, and a plan that is backed or taken forward by a process and a set of programs, and then ultimately tools. But I think everything starts with a plan. Naturally, the plan is carried forward by a message to the market or a narrative. Go-to-market operations take the plan and manifest it into reality. And then talent is a core element. And finally, culture, the brand of that entity. All right, so that's the kind of the academic side of things. But you asked for a story from my past. I mentioned 20 years operating. Could be a long time or a short time. It feels like it just started not too long ago. But the Okta years, it's probably a good place to start, Matt. I joined Okta in the summer of 2011. The company was late Series A. They had started about 2 years earlier. These were alumni of Salesforce.com, where I spent the first 4 or 5 years of my professional life learning and developing. And so I was inspired by their courage to not just identify, but seek out a solution to the problem, meaning quit their jobs and go work for a startup that no one's ever heard of. When I joined, they were less than $1 million in revenue. It was about 12 design customers, but founder-led sales, 12 customers. And they had a sales team that, to their credit, engaged an audience, but a lot of this, as you touched on, as we touch on a lot in these conversations, around the kind of problem market, product market fit, they didn't have it, right? You might even say, and folks listening might think, under $1 million, you're still kind of experimenting a bit. And that was true. But I'd say, getting back to the first item that I listed, the plan, didn't really come to fruition until about $1 million. I would say it was after that kind of 50 customers. We had approximately 50,000 users of the service after my first 8 months of being there. And there were some leadership, moves that were made. There were some phenomenal people that brought enterprise rigor and caliber to augment our already core team. And the first thing we started with is, what is the plan? And not just the quota and financial plan, but what is our strategy? And a lot of that underpinning was, like I said, the next element, which is, what is the narrative to the market? I think a lot of people find when you're kind of experimenting and seeking out a fit for your problem, a fit for your product, that there's a tools conversation versus a solutions. So that mental shift away from just, we have a product that solves for a problem and it's very tactical, to more of a broader narrative that our company, this company, Okta, was disrupting a space, identity management, through a well-proven technology model by the likes of Salesforce.com, multi-tenant SaaS, and a business element to it, which is subscription-based, to allow people to do what exactly? And there were 3 core themes that company had really captured, and this is only by really soliciting feedback from not just the wins, but the people you'd lost to as well, was, look, I don't have a desire solely for a single sign-on solution. I have a strategy from the customer's perspective to pursue this cloud-first approach. Or if I'm a legacy or a company that's kind of gone through a few different technology cycles, a first cloud approach. So what the company did very successfully around that $1 million mark is put a plan in place and say, let's do the TAM, SAM, SOM exercise. Let's get our narrative down really crisp, where there's going to be many different schools. We can group them into two, that first cloud or cloud first audience. And so that was a technology imperative. And then there are broad implications for the utility and the benefits, the economic benefits of moving to this place called the cloud for identity management. And then finally, beyond moving to the cloud, there was obviously concerns. And the underpinning of the company to this very day, 20 years on, is around security. And so those core elements of the macro shift from on-premise to the cloud for all things, but then this ultimately being identity management, the suggestion that identity management would take with it benefits, but also concerns of user security, required a solution or set of solutions, and that's how we position the company.
Yeah. So one, on the planning side, it sounds like probably RevOps or finance, or maybe both collectively, the owners of this plan, but you got to have some sort of plan so that you know where you're heading. It's okay for that plan. Like that plan should be fluid and flexible, right? Like it'll change, especially early on. You're going to be going to market and you're going to be learning things, and those things need to make their way back into the plan. And so when you consider putting this plan together, set your time horizons and targets consistent with the amount of the speed at which you're also going to learn and can incorporate those learnings back into your plan. And then the last thing I'll mention and then kind of look for some feedback from you is call it a single owner or team of the plan. This is a big one, I think, whether it's plan or anything outside of this. I always try to make sure that there's only one owner for every goal, objective, key result, whatever it is that we're measuring, the one throat to choke rule, because otherwise you'll wind up in that Spider-Man meme where everyone's just pointing at the other person of like, well, it's your job. It's your job. Well, you own it. Well, we both own it, right? Like you got to have one person, one team, one core group responsible for things on the planning side. My question for you there was, I think as marketers, marketing operators, it's easy for us to look at our product that we are building and ultimately selling and look at that as a collection of features, things that it's able to do. And then a lot of times that's what comes across within our messaging and the narrative that we're bringing to market. What you mentioned is, I'll say, doing things differently, which is actually understanding the way that your customers speak about the problems that they have and the solutions that they're trying to deploy, and then wrap your messaging around that, because that's going to be the thing that'll resonate the most with them on the other side. Is that right?
Yeah, using customer proof for validation, that's the question. You get me thinking, there's the first few months that I was in that role as an account executive, I mentioned we had a dozen customers when I joined the company, less than $1 million in revenue. And looking at those kind of characteristics, this informs the ICP, right? There's ambitions to sell to everybody in the market, having that kind of bifurcated for the enterprise or incumbents, first cloud mantra, and then the cloud first for everyone else. That was kind of a new age or a startup company even. What I found though, by interviewing those first 12 customers, of which approximately half were in my territory, it wasn't, again, about the technology, it was about the outcome. And so it was kind of making sure that narrative, that brand promise of we're going to help you do one of those three things, or all of those three things, move, identity to the cloud, to embrace this concept of mobility, and to ensure there's strong security. The output, when proven by a customer, told to me by a customer, and I'll never forget it. I was visiting a customer in Massachusetts. It turned out that of those 12 customers, 3 were literally door to door in Lexington, Mass. And when I met the head of IT and said, "Hey, why'd you sign up?" I hadn't sold this customer, I just inherited the account. I said, "Tell me why. What problem was?" He goes, "Hey, look, we wanted to do those 3 things, and so y'all had demonstrated the aptitude and ability to execute on your technology, which was great. We have a broad strategy to put everything in the cloud moving forward. This is, again, 14 years ago. I said, ultimately, why? What was the business decision? And he said, if it can reduce OpEx, increase efficiency, that's great. But for us in our life sciences business, there's a compliance element. And he said, hey, write this down, 21 CFR 11. And I go, okay. So I take my notebook out and write it down. He goes, that's why we bought. And I go, okay. He goes, you have no idea what that is, do you? I go, no. And he said, it's a regulatory compliance for us in our industry. And there you have it. So I go, great. We helped you prove compliance with this regulatory framework. And he said, no. I go, okay, so why? And he goes, you helped make it easier to get to that stage. Pardon me. So I said, okay. He goes, and that's why I bought. And then I went neighbor to neighbor and said, why'd you buy? And said, we all get together after hours and we bought for the same reason they did. And so back to the question of the narrative, there was very early, when you're $1 million or less than $1 million in revenue, to go and be vertical specific, I'd say. But the tone went from we help make it easy to move, users and secure them around the cloud to we can help with compliance initiatives for industries such as including life sciences, biotech, pharma, et cetera. And so that was, not just regurgitating what they said, but said, how big is that sub-market? And it turns out, especially in that geography, very, very big. And so, narrative, what were we doing? I think, everyone might be wondering, what do you do with that information? We organized, and much in the same way you've organized, last I checked in, it was less than 16,000. So this community itself is growing, exponentially. We said there must be an audience here willing to hear this message, not that they just love our technology or our sales approach or whatever it was. That's probably true on some levels. It was ultimately about you help me get closer to my strategic objective, which is to be compliant. It also humbles you that you're not the only player, but playing a small part in that journey was incredibly powerful. And so we did. We organized things like customer advisory boards to test, yes, Matt, the narrative of is there a strong response to the signal we're putting out that we can be an identity and security company that helps organizations maintain, prove, reach compliance? Yes, there was. And so that was sort of a drumbeat that we took from 10 to 100 across many industries, but keep on experimenting. So tactic was organize your customers. This was a head of product, head of marketing in a room in Boston, Massachusetts, whiteboarding and saying, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? It's remembering your early customers. Some might call them design partners. What should I build? But I don't think there's ever a time where you stop listening to them and having them inform what your narrative is. We think this is what it is. What do you think? They go, yes, but tweak it a bit. So that's to say the customers ultimately, I touched on that notion of team, were a huge part of that 1 to 10 journey and helping us find the repeatability in not only our message, but our go-to-market operation. Where should we staff all of the resources, not just on the engineering and product side, but when we go out there and engage this market with a very, simple yet potent message that we can help do these things, which will result in these outcomes, proved to be true because the customers kept validating it for us.
Yeah. And it's a good reminder out there for, whether you're building or supporting or just operating at these early stage companies, of those early adopters and customers that you have, if you're in this $1 million, $2 million sort of revenue range, obviously are having a huge impact on the product that you're building and the solution you're actually bringing to the market. But you should not forget that they should have a huge impact on your messaging as well, and how you're bringing that narrative to the market, because those are going to be the people that sit down with you and tell you, I think I forgot it now already, like 21 CFR 11, something like that. Like, how else are you going to learn that beyond having conversations with those early customers? But that then allows you to go out and deploy that sort of narrative to others in the space. It's also nothing you're going to learn from your quote unquote product, right, that you were building. So those early customers, whether it's marketing, if you're on the sales enablement side, whatever, those early customers should be a huge pipeline of information that inform how you go to market, how you sell, and the types of people that you should be going after.
Yeah, 100%. I know I touched on culture and team a little bit as well, but it's, I think, ingrained in every company I've been part of. Talk a bit about Okta, but their, early values, there were two of them that really stand out in conversations like this. And one was protecting the customer. It was a moral imperative to be honest about what we do and can't do and what we've succeeded at and failed at, and just having a very transparent relationship with our customer and always putting them at the front. But this curiosity, I'd say it's intellectual curiosity, this drive to learn and feeling that knowledge of all things was like our ultimate currency. That was ultimate sales weapon. You talk about a killer pitch deck or an awesome rep or demos, whatever it might be, the conference you're at, the booth, all that's peripheral. It was the knowledge that we sought to obtain and then employ fed into the operation of the company. I mean, early stage, 0 to 1, but the 1 to 10 stage, we really got serious. This was, again, a signal change with leadership saying, we have to create a simple yet repeatable process that is going to do something very direct, which is drive outcomes for our customers, value-based outcomes, quantifiable outcomes. That 0 to 1 journey of kind of experimenting, I mentioned there's about 50 customers or so. I should have said we were out of Series A at that point. So this is, and most companies say that doesn't look like a Series A company. It's doing, a little bit more than $1 million and has a valuation that they need to step into a bit. The idea that we would take those learnings of what didn't work and kind of that rate of change and get really good really quick required that we made a heavy investment into our training, our knowledge sharing, our enablement internally, and that naturally fed into programs which really took the fore after about 3 or 4 years of retaining and empowering our customers to reach their outcomes.
Yeah. And so you hit on the talent and the culture piece a little bit, but I want to move on to some of those. So as we think about these early stage companies, right, that are in this 1 to 10 sort of journey, you mentioned the people aspect of being super, super important. So as you think about building out the revenue function, whether it's marketing, sales, post-sales, revenue operations, business operations, whatever it might be, what are the types of profiles or people who've you seen succeed and do well? And then maybe the flip side of are there any, profiles, right, that maybe aren't set up to perform well at early stage companies like this?
Yeah. So creating a candidate profile, right? Everyone creates a customer profile or ideal candidate profile. I don't think there's a single right answer. I mean, just reflections on it. Part of me would say just hire people out of the best company of the last 10 years that had a meaningful outcome and their tribe and just kind of lift and put them in and plant them. In my experience in those last 3 companies, I found that some of that is true, some of that institutional knowledge and people that have kind of been to the top of the mountain, so to speak, and knew what success at a massive level looked like. But balancing that with people that didn't really fit a corporate or a mold for a role. So this required that you look at the intangibles. Does this person have high agency? Are they motivated to not only improve themselves, but the organization they're a part of? If you kind of almost think of it as like a hierarchy of needs, if you go back to like Psych 101 and look at Maslow's hierarchy, it's what do they really seek beyond the taking care of themselves? Maybe it's financial security or freedom, which can come from obviously having success in these endeavors. But for me, it was, the question is what I look for in hiring and looking for in a team, whether I worked for these people or they worked alongside or for me, was people that were intellectually curious. Clearly had some success they could speak of, some core foundation to build off of, but it didn't necessarily mean that they came from the same industry. I think a lot of people have experimented with that. They don't have to come from a high-tech background. If you work in a high-tech company, that can be a bit contrarian. Some of the best people that I can think of came from somewhat peculiar backgrounds. They might have been in telecommunications and had never sold quote unquote enterprise software to this audience before. And that was okay because the intangibles were they were high agency, they had integrity, they were committed to learning, that's for sure, but they had a process that could be refined. And they also had a vision for what they wanted, not only in their career, but what they wanted in their life. And that's where we came together is these companies effectively serve as platforms to realize not just business outcomes or professional outcomes, but life outcomes. We're spending our time after all. And so I think some of those intangibles that people had, a sense of urgency, I mentioned just a natural curiosity about solving problems, and a moral compass that would ensure they have, again, the customer and, in effect, our brand in mind when doing their business was really important. But the takeaway was, diverse teams are strong teams, and diversity can take many different forms. But you want to have people that had a little bit of a heterogeneous background that wasn't just this cast type. Because some of those, frankly, we shied away from. You don't want people that might be lived in a revenue stream at big company, and God bless them if they were doing that, but you need people with those core elements that, look, we only have one quarter at a time to prove ourselves internally and to the market. And that's what I think the company really hit well on, is defining those characteristics and making intentional hires. Then naturally that attracted, and our success attracted more people in that sort of criteria to follow.
Yeah. The natural curiosity piece, I think, is super, super important, especially if you just think for a second about the company stage that we're talking about. Again, we've said it multiple times, you don't have things figured out. You're still very much figuring out things as you go. And so I look at that as one of those things where when I'm talking to a candidate or trying to evaluate fit and some other things like that, it's like, does this person look at things of right versus wrong versus what did I learn from a particular situation about what worked and what didn't work? Because to me, again, like right versus wrong is like more defensive. It's like, well, this was right, I was right, you were wrong sort of deal. It's like, no, I learned that this worked or this didn't work. And so now I'm going to take that and I'm going to try something new. And that's basically all that you're doing every single day when you're at a company that's an early stage like that. And that also, like, as you get later stage, within revenue operations or any ops role, that's also basically what you're doing every single day, is trying to figure out stuff that works, stuff that doesn't work, so that tomorrow you can do more of the stuff that works and less of the stuff that doesn't work. But that is a very key component of being able to operate and succeed at companies like that. And so, yeah, I think that's the number one thing that I would put at the top of my list. If you're in a position of hiring or bringing on team members at early stage companies in that sort of range, is like, that should be the thing at the top of your list.
Yeah, and there's really three things, a company at any stage, but in this 1 to 10 phase for the audience listening is, leadership or the entity, you set a standard, sort of a bar of operating, and you hire against that standard. And then ultimately, I think in leadership or whatever your function is in a managerial capacity, you encourage and you emulate and you promote the right behaviors. And those behaviors ultimately define your culture. And that ultimately is the best hiring engine, is culture. But I think the important thing when hiring and when looking at the right profile and, yes, but sort of the tangibles or intangibles, it's ensuring that people can, not just abide by, but they can match your standards of play and ultimately raise them. And, I think that becomes very infectious. It also roots out, frankly, people that aren't, maybe they're probably great people and maybe great for other companies. It's not for the system that you're building. Yeah. So I think just adherence to standards, accountability to behaviors, and promotion of a culture that is in that vein, transparent and geared towards high velocity, knowledge, and ultimately success for not only the company, but your customers, is core to hiring.
Yeah. And the one piece I'll hit on there, you mentioned the accountability piece. Certainly driving that accountability is super important, but also understand when you're hiring or bringing on new people that, again, what we talked about before, you have this natural curiosity about things that'll work, things that won't work. You will bring on people that may not work out, and they could have a great track record. They could check all those boxes for you coming in, and they, for whatever reasons, don't perform. I know I saw this at a company I was at on this kind of $1 to $10 million journey where I was a VP business operations and revenue operations. We brought on a new salesperson who was going to be this enterprise account executive for us. And he had previously worked at some companies and just like always blew his quota out of the water, was just consistently a high performer. And these were other technology companies, but they were products in different spaces and also at different stages. References were great. All this stuff checked out. Like, he had this natural curiosity that we talked about. He got in, and like, there's some personal stuff that he was dealing with, but then also just like whether it was our sales process or the type of product we were building, like, he just could not wrap his head around the sale, and outcomes were not being produced. And we saw this happen within the first 3 to 4 months, where we brought on other people that were able to quickly ramp up and begin to execute and deliver those outcomes. And, those were, that was in that particular scenario, we were like, hey, we've got to move on. We're going to do what's best for this person and for us. But you could have easily wound up in a situation where you're like, well, maybe I just got to try this thing, or maybe I just need to do this thing for that person. And again, you need to drive accountability. And also, we talked about results reflect culture. If you drag those things out, that also negatively can impact your culture. You're not going to be batting 1,000. You're going to make mistakes on the hiring side as well, despite all the things we just talked about before, but that's okay. That's another thing that you can learn from and improve upon going forward.
Agreed. Yeah, it's on both sides too, right? I mean, any teammate or anyone that I even hired that wasn't a fit, you try and determine that early and make sure it's mutual. I mean, there's obviously situations where there's other terms of departure, but I think just having an honest conversation that this is not for everybody. This 1 to 10 journey is attractive to the outsiders, but anyone that's been part of it knows that you're not predestined. Those stats I shared earlier, I believe those are real, less than 1% success rate. So being comfortable knowing that success is not guaranteed, and whether past performance is not a future indicator, as they say. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the cultural element to me, is what separated past organizations that have eclipsed or that have broken free of that, they call startup speak, I guess, escape velocity, is tied to the attitude and ultimately the approach and behaviors of the people. So yeah, I agree. It's the results ultimately speak for themselves.
Yep. People get things done. All right. I have one more question for you. It is not RevOps related, is not Valley of Death related at all. We talked a little bit actually before we started the recording about our conference, RevOpsAF, which last year was in San Diego. This year is going to be in New Orleans. For you to set the stage, I want you to imagine that you're the opening keynote speaker at RevOpsAF in New Orleans this year. And we've got a crowd of 350 people in the audience, right? And we announced your name, Garrett Stanton. You're entering stage left. Everyone stands up. They all start screaming, Garrett, Garrett. What would be your walk-up song that you would play as you came onto stage to deliver the opening keynote for RevOpsAF?
Oh man, there's so many. Put me on the spot. Is there a genre, or is it any? I can pick any one.
So short answer is you can pick any one. I mean, and I've heard people have brought up, like someone the other day brought up this classic Beethoven symphony. Someone has brought up The Sound of Music. And then, we've got like everywhere from, DJ Khaled, All I Do Is Win, 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 Eminem, Sia, so truly there's no genre. There are no limitations on this. I mean, you could say elevator music for, that, I don't know, maybe that hypes you up. But no,
you mentioned classics. I mean, my wife is more of a top 40 person, so I should say something that's probably modern or new age, but I'll go classic and Ride the Valkyries.
Nice. Very good choice. I support that. And I think it's an appropriate ending to our episode here, that we've gone all the way from the Valley of Death to riding the Valkyries and everywhere in between. So Garrett, thank you very much, my friend, for joining, for dropping some knowledge on us. I really appreciate it, but that's all I got for you. So I'll let you run.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode, everybody.
For more great content like this, join our community at RevOpsCoop.com and check out the links provided in the show notes.
Keep it RevOpsAF, y'all.